And now, please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. The other day when we were in the office, Will turned to me and said, well, it's a good thing that Patriots' Day falls on the Wednesday after tax day, not beforehand. Pay our taxes, now we can. Now we're ready to celebrate the country. This year, of course, is the 250th anniversary since the Declaration of Independence. And I'm someone who loves history and doesn't want to give up an opportunity to talk about cool historical stuff. And since most of you won't be around the July 4th weekend, I didn't want to lose the opportunity to talk about the 250th anniversary of our country. Also, I figure I probably won't be around for the 300th, so I might as well make the most of this while I can. Now, there are so many great stories that come out of the Revolution. So many great things that inspire. And it's easy sometimes to lose sight of some of those stories. I was thinking the other day, when you go back to the year 1776, what some people might not realize is how bleak a year it actually was. There was the long build-up for the passing or the signing of the Declaration of Independence after the British left Boston, yay, on March 17, 1776 and retired up to Halifax. But from the signing of the Declaration of Independence on, things went in a very bad direction indeed. The British, their strategy was to cut off that rebellious place, New England, from the rest of the colonies. By far, the highest percentage of patriots in the colonies were in New England, and that was in no small measure due to the presence of the congregational churches. And so the idea was to send an army north from Montreal, and then an army south from New York to cut off New England by taking over the Hudson. Now, as it turns out, Benedict Arnold, of all people, stopped the army from advancing from the north in 1776. And they returned the next year to then meet a disastrous fate at Saratoga, the British, that is. But the major expeditionary force landed in New York. And the British, when they sent over this force, it was the largest expeditionary force they had ever sent over. Over 20,000 British soldiers landed in New York. And the other side, defending New York, were roughly 30,000 Americans, combination of militiamen and the new Continental Army. And the Americans proceeded to get thrashed time after time after time. It was a depressing moment. And not only were the Continental armies or the armies of Washington losing time and again, but through desertion, the army was just melting away. So that from an army of 30,000, by the time Washington was retreating across New Jersey and crossed over the Delaware River, he had only 3,000 soldiers left. What was worse is that those 3,000 soldiers had year-long enlistments, and those year-long enlistments were going to be due on December 31st. So in December 1776, Washington himself could say that he feared that the end was there. The great experiment of the Revolution, less than 6 months after the Declaration, would be ended. And it was at that time when Thomas Paine, who had arrived in the country 2 years before, penned his famous work, The American Crisis. I love these words, some of the greatest words in my mind written in the English language. Here in the midst of the darkest time of the Revolution, Thomas Paine writes, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated." couple weeks later, actually just 10 days later, on December 25th, Washington, of course, snuck his army across the Delaware at night and surprised the Hessians at Trenton, garnering the first victory that Washington's armies had and encouraging those people to re-enlist for another year, and the Patriot cause survived. See all the great stories there are? I could go on the rest of the morning. But what I really want to talk about is not Thomas Paine's American Crisis, but his more influential and more famous work that he wrote earlier that year, Common Sense. What you have to realize about America at the beginning of 1776 is that while there had been disputes over the colonies, most people in the colonies blamed Parliament for this or the king's advisors. They considered themselves loyal Englishmen. What made Common Sense such a radical pamphlet, such a radical tract, was that Paine attacked the very concept of a king. He didn't shy away from it at all. And it's a beautiful work if you read it through. Paine starts off and he says, he goes back, as many political philosophers did at the time, he goes back to this theoretical state of nature. He's like, theoretically, back in the day when human beings were first gathering around, they'd come together to form society, because society, you want to do things with other people, share gifts and talents with other people. But government, according to Paine, was only instituted because it was needed to restrain the vices of humans. Once you get together in society, someone's liable to steal or kill or do some other bad things, and government has to be there to make sure that that does not happen. But the natural form of government arising out of this is where everyone's involved. And then as the society grows, the natural form is to have some sort of elected representatives. In no way, shape, or form, according to Paine, is the natural mode of things to have a king or an aristocracy. And then he goes on to talk about, he says, when you think about it, the whole concept of kingship is absurd. You can see naturally why society might have men, women, or different divisions, but certainly there's no natural reason for a division between kings and subjects. He talks about how, when you think about it, how do kings get power, usually? They take it by force. They're nothing more than gangsters. That's what a king is. There's no divine right of kings. He's like, look at William the Conqueror. The current king, George III, is descended from William the Conqueror, and he invaded with a French army in 1066 against the will of the people and kept them under his boot. Just because you're descended from him, that all of a sudden we should owe loyalty to that man? And he's like, while there might be some good kings now and again, the vast majority of them have been awful. And what's intriguing is he quotes extensively from 1 Samuel. If you know your Old Testaments well, you know that, first of all, he talks about the story in the book of Judges where Gideon, the judge Gideon, wins this major victory, and people offer him the crown, and Gideon says, no, my loyalty is to God. God is my king. And then in 1 Samuel, the people are clamoring for a king, and Samuel is like, you don't want to do this. This is bad. This will lead to bad things. You have one king. That king is God. But the people clamor all the more, and Saul gets raised up as king. And he says, listen, that America has such potential. What we're fighting for here is not just our town or our particular colony. We're fighting for a whole continent. We have what it takes to do it. Think of what lies ahead, and to delay it now, to delay the revolution now, at some point the separation will happen. You might as well take it while the opportunity presents itself. And people say that the U.S. has benefited from being a colony of England. He's like, nonsense. They've just taken taxes from us. And when they get involved in their wars, they become our wars. We need independence. Now, when we read through Common Sense, you sit back, you say, oh yeah, all that makes total sense to me today. But it's easy to lose sight how radical this was. At the time in the 18th century, the normal course of things is, oh, of course there should be a hierarchy in society. You go back to Aristotle, and Aristotle talked about how naturally in society there are some who are born to rule, there are some who are born to be slaves by their natural dispositions, according to Aristotle. And so this notion that there should be a hierarchy in society was something that was generally accepted by most people in Europe and in the American colonies. But the thing that argued against it, and the source of Paine's writing, the source of Paine's ideas, actually comes from Protestant Christianity. That's the source of it. The notions of equality that we hold so dear have their roots in Protestant Christianity. After all, everybody is made in the image and likeness of God, according to Genesis 1. You have in 1 Corinthians 12, Paul writing passionately saying, oh, there are different gifts and talents that people have, but all of them, every single one of them, is crucial to the body of Christ, and they all should be treated equally. And then the passage that Jim read in Matthew 18, I love. This is Jesus' statement on the nature of the church, the ecclesia. But of course, Congregationalists like to point out that the word ecclesia should not be translated as church, but instead congregation. Good Congregationalists. Congregation. But you look at how things get resolved in the congregation. It's not a top-down thing that's laid out here from Jesus. When someone goes astray, you talk to them. And if they are not coming around, then you bring together a group. And then you go to the congregation and talk about it. And whatever you bring to God as a congregation, God hears, because where 2 or 3 are gathered, I am in the midst of them. This basic notion throughout New England at the time that everybody is equal before God. The town meetings in New England reflecting the congregational meetings throughout this great colony. Now, I'm someone who has had the privilege, and it is a privilege in my job, when I was in Iowa, when I was in Houston, different things that I've done to interact with a wide variety of people. And one of the conclusions I've come through from my experience interacting with people is I'm always surprised, pleasantly surprised, how good and decent people are. And not only how good and decent they are, but how rational they are in the way they make decisions. I might not agree with other people, but I love hearing about how they came to their conclusions. Everybody has their own story. Everybody comes from a place. And I value that. This is why I'm such a dyed-in-the-wool Congregationalist. I take this stuff very seriously. And so when I look back 250 years ago, when Common Sense at this time was being read, the most popular pamphlet published during the colonial era, and the most influential, the lesson that I glean from that is the value of democracy. And I think if there's anything that we as Americans today, 250 years on, need to recommit to, it is the value and goodness of democracy. Rooted in a fundamental belief that people are at their core good and decent human beings and rational human beings. And that a functioning and healthy society gives everybody a voice. And so what does that mean? I'm someone who detests gerrymandering, for instance. I loathe it because it's anti-democratic by nature. And it gives the extreme wings of different parties all the power rather than to the people. I'm someone who loathes all the money in politics since Citizens United. I think it pollutes our system. It pollutes people against one another. Special interests get way more power than they should, and it comes at the expense of democracy and the people. I think that we should have the popular election of the president. The purpose of the Electoral College in the past no longer seems relevant, and now if you live in a place like Massachusetts or Texas, your vote for the president doesn't matter at all. And all the money and investment gets poured into a half dozen states, and the rest of us just sit on the sidelines. I don't know how that's democratic. We should try and encourage as many people to vote as possible. Across the spectrum. I'd rather have the voice of the people be heard and me be wrong than the voice of the people not be heard. Because I believe in people. So yes, we want our elections to be safe and secure, but we also want to have as many people vote as possible. Not just people in your own group. Believe in the power of democracy. You also need to figure out some way. You can't have a functioning democracy without freedom of the press. And one thing that depresses me, as I'm sure it depresses all of you, is that when we're all stuck on these phones, our algorithms just feed us what we want to see. And so we don't actually see what other people think or believe. And it makes us worse off as a democracy for that. So on this 250th anniversary, on this Patriots Day, as you go and watch the marathon tomorrow and celebrate different things, at some point open up the Declaration of Independence. And remember that great line of Jefferson's, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. That was a radical statement at the time. It's become a bedrock of who we are. And it was based fundamentally on our religious beliefs that everybody is equal in the sight of God. So let us commit to that as good Americans and remember the true roots of our democracy.